The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolis Museum of Art was thick with the scent of money and magnolias. It was a gilded cage of forced smiles and whispered judgments, where the clinking of champagne glasses sounded like the sharpening of knives. Hundreds of the city's elite, draped in couture and dripping with diamonds, moved through the cavernous space, their laughter echoing off the marble floors and vaulted ceilings. This was the Metropolis Philanthropy Gala, the apex of the social season, and tonight, its crowning jewel was Judge Elise Montgomery. Elise stood near the edge of the dais, a figure of serene composure amidst the orchestrated chaos. At 58, she possessed a stillness that was its own form of power. Her gown, a deep sapphire velvet that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, was elegant in its simplicity. A single strand of heirloom pearls, a gift from her late father, rested against her collarbone. She held a small clutch in one hand, her knuckles barely white, the only outward sign of the tension coiling in her stomach. She was here to accept the Justice Thurgood Marshall Humanitarian Award, a recognition of her 2 decades on the federal bench and her work establishing legal aid clinics for underserved communities. But the award felt secondary to the true purpose of the evening. This was a confrontation 30 years in the making. Her eyes scanned the room, moving past the mayor and the senator, past the titans of industry and their impossibly polished wives, until they found her, Vivian Sterling. Vivian was the gala's chairwoman, a queen in her element. She held court near the base of the grand staircase, a vision in shimmering silver, her blonde hair swept into an intricate chignon. She was laughing, a bright, brittle sound that carried across the ballroom, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a banking CEO. To the world, she was the epitome of grace and success, a self-made billionaire who had built a corporate empire from the ashes of her family's ruin. To Elise, she was a ghost, a wound that had never fully healed. 5 minutes, Your Honor, a young event coordinator whispered, her eyes wide with reverence. Elise gave a small, appreciative nod. She took a steadying breath, the scent of magnolias catching in her throat. And it happened. A flicker, a memory, sharp and unwanted, like a shard of glass under the skin. Rain lashing against the mullioned windows of a university library, the scent of wet wool and old books, a girl with bright, hopeful eyes and a silver locket clutched in her hand. We have to do something. Ellie. Vivian's younger self had pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. He's poisoning people. My father. He doesn't know the whole truth. The memory dissolved as the master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a blindingly white smile, stepped to the podium. His voice boomed through the sound system, a river of platitudes about justice, service, and honor. Elise listened with half an ear, her focus locked on Vivian, who was now gliding toward the stage, her silver gown rustling like whispers of the past. A woman whose life has been a testament to the highest ideals of our legal system. The anchor was saying, a paragon of integrity and a tireless advocate for the voiceless. It is my profound honor to welcome to the stage the recipient of this year's Humanitarian Award, the Honorable Judge Elise Montgomery. A wave of polite, sustained applause washed over the ballroom. Elise felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her as she began her walk to the stage, a journey of 50 feet that felt like a mile. She kept her back straight, her chin level, her expression one of measured gratitude. She passed tables of people she had sentenced, people she had exonerated, people whose lives had been irrevocably shaped by the stroke of her pen. She reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage. As she placed her foot on the first step, a figure moved to intercept her. It was Vivian. She stood at the base of the stairs, a perfectly sculpted smile on her face, her hand raised in a gesture that was both a greeting and a barrier. The applause faltered as the room sensed the unscheduled interruption. The news anchor looked momentarily confused. Cameras that had been trained on the podium swiveled to capture the interaction. "Elise," Vivian said, her voice a silken murmur, yet pitched just loud enough for those nearby and the stage microphones to catch. "My dear, you look overwhelmed. There must be a mistake." Elise met her gaze. The cool blue of Vivian's eyes, a chilling echo of the desperate girl in the library. "Vivian," she replied, her own voice calm and even. "I don't believe so." Vivian's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in closer, a conspiratorial gesture that was, in reality, an act of supreme public aggression. "Oh, but there is," she whispered, the words a poisoned dart. "The catering staff entrance is in the back." The insult landed with devastating precision. It was not a clumsy slur, but a masterfully crafted piece of social cruelty, in one sentence, in front of the city's entire power structure. Vivian had stripped away Elise's title, her accomplishments, her gown, and her pearls, and reduced her to a servant. She had questioned her very right to exist in this space. A collective, barely audible gasp rippled through the nearest tables. The silence in the ballroom became heavy, charged with shock and embarrassment. The flash of a photographer's camera caught the moment Vivian's triumphant, pitying smile, Elise's impassive face. Another memory flared in Elise's mind, brighter and more painful than the first. The cold, sterile room of a campus disciplinary board. The chairman, a stern-faced dean, looking down at her over his spectacles. "Miss Montgomery," he had said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "Vivian Sterling has provided a sworn statement. She says you stole the documents from her father's briefcase. She says you manipulated her. In light of this, and your lack of a credible background, we have no choice but to recommend your expulsion." Powerlessness. The suffocating, paralyzing feeling of being condemned by a lie she could not disprove. She had felt it then, as a scholarship student with no one to defend her. She felt the ghost of it now. But she was no longer that girl. Elise did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not betray a single flicker of the cold fury that was solidifying in her chest. She held Vivian's gaze for a long, silent moment, letting the weight of the insult hang in the air, letting everyone in the room see it for the ugly, pathetic thing it was. Then, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of a challenge issued and accepted, without another word. She turned her body slightly, bypassing Vivian's outstretched hand, and ascended the stairs to the podium. The news anchor, flustered, stepped aside. Elise adjusted the microphone, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The silence in the room was now absolute. Every guest, every waiter, every photographer held their breath, waiting for the explosion. They expected tears, or anger, or a hurried, flustered retreat. They did not know Judge Elise Montgomery. She looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping past them all, until it landed once more on Vivian, who stood at the foot of the stage, her mask of polite concern back in place, though a flicker of triumphant malice still danced in her eyes. "Thank you," Elise began, her voice as clear and steady as a courtroom declaration. "Thank you for that introduction. It serves as a potent reminder of why we are here tonight." She let the words settle. We are here to celebrate the ideal of justice. And justice, in its purest form, is about seeing things as they truly are, stripped of artifice and assumption. Her eyes bored into Vivian's. It's about understanding that a person's worth is not determined by the door they use to enter a room, but by the integrity with which they conduct themselves once inside. A smattering of applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing in strength as the meaning behind her words resonated through the room. Vivian's smile tightened at the edges. Elise had not taken the bait. She had refused to be the victim. Instead, she had taken Vivian's ugly little weapon and reforged it, live on stage, into a shield of unimpeachable dignity. The audience saw her composure not as simple poise, but as the armor of a woman of immense strength. But Elise knew the truth. It was the armor of a woman who had been preparing for this war for 30 years. Vivian Sterling had just fired the opening salvo. She had no idea that Elise Montgomery was ready to burn her entire empire to the ground in response. The gala ended, but the assault did not. Vivian's attack was not the impulsive cruelty of a petty rival. It was the calculated opening move of a grand strategy. 2 days later, the first follow-up strike landed. A syndicated gossip column, penned by a journalist known to be on Vivian Sterling's payroll, ran a piece under the headline, "Judicial Temperament Gala Gaffe Raises Questions." The article painted Elise as an oversensitive guest who had misinterpreted a well-intentioned, if clumsy, attempt at humor from the gala's chairwoman. It hinted at rumors of Elise being difficult and arrogant, quoting anonymous sources who questioned if her activist background was suitable for the federal bench. It was a classic smear campaign, designed to reframe the narrative and cast doubt on the victim. Elise read the digital version in the solemn, wood-paneled silence of her judicial chambers, a sanctuary of logic and order that now felt besieged, the scent of old leather and paper. Usually a comfort, did little to soothe the cold knot of anger tightening in her gut. This was escalation, a public declaration that the gala incident was not the end, but the beginning. Her young clerk, David, a bright, earnest man who idolized her, entered with a stack of morning briefs, his face clouded with concern. "Your Honor, have you seen the news?" "I have, David," Elise said, closing the browser on her laptop. "It appears Ms. Sterling is determined to have the last word." "It's character assassination," David said, his voice laced with outrage. "Should we issue a statement, call the paper." Elise held up a hand. "No. That's what she wants. To draw me into a public squabble where she controls the narrative. We will not play on her field." She paused, her gaze distant. "This isn't about a column, David. It's about power. She's testing my defenses, trying to see if I will retreat." The following week, the second strike came. It was more sophisticated, more dangerous. An anonymous ethics complaint was filed with the Judicial Council, alleging that a foundation Elise had helped establish 10 years prior had received a donation from a company that later had a minor case before her court. The case had been procedural, the donation fully disclosed, and Elise had offered to recuse herself at the time, an offer both sides had declined. It was a baseless accusation, easily disproven, but the mere existence of an investigation was a stain. News of the complaint was mysteriously leaked to a legal blog, which ran a story questioning Elise's judgment. Sitting in her chambers, the official letter from the council on her desk, Elise finally understood the full scope of Vivian's intent. This was not about revenge for a 30-year-old slight. This was about total annihilation. Vivian wasn't just trying to humiliate her. She was trying to destroy her career, dismantle her legacy, and erase her from the halls of power she had fought so hard to enter. The fragmented memories of their shared past began to plague her more frequently, surfacing at unguarded moments. Vivian, tears streaming down her face in their shared dorm room, holding a letter from her father. "He's being investigated. Ellie." They're saying the company's new alloy is faulty, that he knew about it. It's not true. He's being set up by his business partners. Elise, sitting in a dusty corner of the engineering library late at night, a binder of metallurgical reports open in front of her. Reports she'd found misplaced on a shelf. Reports that clearly showed the alloy's stress test failures had been deliberately falsified. Her heart pounding with the terrible weight of the truth. She had lived with the guilt of her actions for decades, believing she had done the right thing, the only thing. Despite the personal cost, she had lost her friend, nearly her academic career, and a piece of her own youthful innocence. She had assumed Vivian simply hated her for her role in her family's downfall. But this level of sustained, strategic malice felt different. It felt like a vendetta that had been nurtured and refined over a lifetime. Elise knew she could no longer remain passive. To defend herself was to cede the initiative. She had to understand the why, not just the why of the old betrayal, but the why of this renewed, vicious assault. She needed to know everything about the woman Vivian Sterling had become. She picked up her personal cell phone and made a call she hadn't made in years. The phone rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. Well, if it isn't the ghost of journalism past, to what do I owe the honor? Judge. Hello, Marcus, Elise said, a faint smile touching her lips. I have a story for you. A big one. But this time, you'll be working for me. Marcus Thorne was a journalistic dinosaur, a cynical, fast-talking investigative reporter from the old school who now ran a small but fiercely independent online publication. He had a bloodhound's nose for hypocrisy and a deep-seated distrust of the wealthy and powerful. Years ago, Elise, then a prosecutor, had been the source for one of his biggest stories, a story that had exposed corruption at City Hall. They had developed a grudging respect for one another. They met the next day at a nondescript diner far from the courthouse and the city's financial district. The air smelled of stale coffee and fried onions. Marcus slid into the red vinyl booth opposite her, his tie loosened, a worn notepad and a pen in his hand. So, he said, skipping the pleasantries, the society pages are buzzing. Vivian Sterling tries to order a federal judge to the back door, and the judge politely tells her where to go. It's a good story, but it's not your kind of story. What's the real angle? Elise took a sip of water. The real story, Marcus, is about who Vivian Sterling is, and more importantly, how she became who she is. I want you to dig into every aspect of her life, her business, Sterling Corporation, the source of her seed money, her political connections, her family history. I want to know everything. I want the unvarnished truth. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's a tall order. Sterling is notoriously private. She's built a fortress around herself. Fortresses have foundations. Marcus, I want you to find the cracks. Elise slid a cashier's check across the table. It was a significant sum, drawn from her personal savings. This is your retainer. Your expenses will be covered. I need you to be my eyes and ears. I need you to be a ghost. Marcus looked at the check, then back at her, his sharp eyes assessing her. This is personal, isn't it? This goes deeper than one night at a gala. Elise's gaze didn't waver. 30 years deeper. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He pocketed the check. You'll have my complete discretion. Judge, where do you want me to start? Start with the end, Elise said. The bankruptcy of Sterling Innovations. 30 years ago. Find out what really happened to her father. For the next several weeks, Elise fought a two-front war. Publicly, she maintained a stoic silence, allowing her legal team to methodically dismantle the ethics complaint. Submitting piles of evidence that proved her conduct had been impeccable. She presided over her court with her usual unwavering focus, refusing to show any sign that the attacks were affecting her. Privately, her nights were consumed by Marcus's updates. He was a master of his craft. He coaxed information from retired journalists, flirted with disgruntled former Sterling employees, and spent days poring over dusty public records and microfiche archives. The first pieces of the puzzle began to arrive in encrypted emails. Got a source inside the SEC archives. One message read, "The case against Edward Sterling was surprisingly thin. The prosecution's key evidence was a set of internal lab reports leaked by an anonymous source at the university. Without that leak, they might never have gotten a conviction." Another email followed days later. Talked to a former secretary from Sterling Innovations. She always believed Edward Sterling took the fall for someone else. Said he was a good man, but too trusting of his senior VP of research, a man named Alistair Finch. Finch conveniently resigned a month before the scandal broke. Golden parachute and all. Vanished. No one's heard from him since. As Elise read the messages in the quiet of her study late at night, the silver locket Vivian had given her felt heavy in her jewelry box upstairs. It was a simple, heart-shaped piece of silver, a gift for her 19th birthday. She remembered the day Vivian gave it to her, their laughter echoing in the autumn air on the university quad. Best friends forever. "Ellie," Vivian had said, fastening the clasp. "Promise." The promise felt like a bitter joke now. Each new piece of information from Marcus chipped away at the simple narrative Elise had held on to for 3 decades, that she had exposed a guilty man to prevent further harm. The possibility that Edward Sterling might have been a pawn, not a king, was a deeply unsettling thought. It didn't change the fact that the product was faulty, but it complicated the morality of her own actions. Had her righteous act of whistleblowing inadvertently helped the real villain escape? The final, crucial piece arrived a month into Marcus's investigation. He had tracked down a retired detective who had been the first officer on the scene of the Sterling family tragedy. It wasn't just a bankruptcy. It was a full-blown catastrophe. After Edward Sterling's conviction, with the family's assets frozen and their name disgraced, Vivian's mother had taken her own life. Marcus's email was stark. "Elise, it's worse than we thought. Vivian didn't just lose her father and her fortune. She lost her mother, too. She was 17. She found her. According to the detective, the girl was never the same. She went from being a bright, popular kid to someone cold, hard, and utterly focused." Elise stared at the words on her screen, a profound chill seeping into her bones. The room felt suddenly airless. All these years, she had carried the guilt of betraying a friend. She had never known the true depth of the devastation she had helped unleash. Vivian's vendetta was no longer just about a ruined company or an imprisoned father. It was about a shattered life, a stolen childhood, and a grief that had been allowed to fester and mutate for 30 years into a monstrous, all-consuming obsession. The memory of the disciplinary hearing returned, but this time with horrifying clarity. Vivian's face, pale and emotionless, as she lied about Elise stealing the documents. It wasn't the face of a simple liar. It was the face of a survivor, a girl who had lost everything and was now clinging to a new, dark purpose. By painting Elise as the villain, Vivian had created a tangible target for her immeasurable pain. She had found a reason to go on living, to one day repay the girl she blamed for the obliteration of her world. Elise finally understood. The gala, the smear campaign, the ethics complaint, these were not random acts of cruelty. They were the meticulously planned final moves in a game of revenge that Vivian Sterling had been playing her entire life. She had built an empire not for wealth or power in themselves, but as a weapon designed with a single purpose, the complete and utter destruction of Judge Elise Montgomery. And the most terrifying part was that the game had only just begun. Vivian was now coming for the one thing Elise held most sacred, the integrity of her courtroom. The realization settled upon Elise with the weight of a judicial robe. This was no longer a battle she could win through defense and dignity. To survive, she had to go on the attack. She had to dismantle Vivian's empire before it dismantled her. She picked up the phone and called Marcus. "I have a new target for you," she said, her voice devoid of all warmth, replaced by the cold, hard precision of a diamond. "Alistair Finch. Find him." The war escalated. Vivian, emboldened by the minor chaos she had created, shifted her focus from Elise's reputation to her active caseload. Elise was presiding over a complex intellectual property dispute between two rival tech firms, a case worth billions. It was a trial watched closely by Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Vivian, through a web of shell corporations and political action committees, had financial ties to one of the litigants, a fact not publicly known. Suddenly, sealed documents from the discovery phase of the case began to leak to a niche but influential tech blog. The documents were carefully selected to create a false narrative, making it appear that Elise was showing favoritism toward one of the parties. The leak was a surgical strike, designed to force Elise to recuse herself, or, even better, to trigger a mistrial that would throw her entire judgment into question. Elise knew instantly it was Vivian's hand at work. The leak was too precise, the target too strategic. Vivian was no longer just attacking the woman. She was attacking the very institution Elise represented. The sanctity of the judicial process itself was now a pawn in Vivian's game. In her chambers, staring at the motion for a mistrial filed by the aggrieved party's lawyers, Elise felt a cold fury she hadn't experienced since her early days as a prosecutor. The wood-paneled walls, once a sanctuary of order, now felt like the walls of a cage. Vivian was boxing her in, using her own rules of ethics and procedure against her. "She's trying to make it impossible for you to do your job," David said, his face pale as he read the blog post. "She's poisoning the well." "She's doing more than that," Elise replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "She is trying to prove a point, that her power, the power of money and influence, is greater than the power of the law, that she can reach into my courtroom and manipulate justice to her will." This was the midpoint, the moment the stakes became absolute. Elise realized that her passive investigation was no longer sufficient. She could not simply uncover the past. She had to disarm the present. Her own legacy and the integrity of her court were on the line. The time for defense was over. The time for offense had begun. She convened a late-night meeting with Marcus in the deserted diner. The smell of grease and burnt coffee hung in the air like a shroud. "She's moved on me," Elise said, her voice tight. "She's interfering with the Axiom Tech case." Marcus whistled softly. "That's a federal crime. Tampering with a case, leaking sealed documents. She's playing with fire." "Vivian believes she's fireproof," Elise countered. "And so far, she's right. She's insulated by layers of wealth and power. We need to find something she can't hide from. We need to find Alistair Finch." For weeks, Finch had been a ghost. Marcus had chased down leads that went from a Swiss bank account closed in the 90s to a rumored sighting in the Caribbean. The man had expertly erased himself. "I'm hitting dead ends, Elise," Marcus admitted. Frustration etched on his face. "The trail is 30 years cold." "Then we need to find a new trail," Elise said, her legal mind shifting into high gear. Vivian didn't just rebuild her family's name, she rebuilt her fortune. Where did her seed money come from? People don't go from orphan 17-year-old to billionaire without help or a significant head start. Let's stop chasing the old crime and start investigating the new one. The shift in focus proved decisive. Marcus, guided by Elise's strategic thinking, began dissecting the origins of Sterling Corporation. He uncovered a series of complex international transactions, a labyrinth of offshore accounts and holding companies designed to obscure the source of Vivian's initial capital. At the center of it all was a small, obscure investment firm based in Liechtenstein. Working his sources, Marcus found a disgruntled former analyst from that firm. After a clandestine meeting in Zurich, fueled by promises of immunity and a desire for his own revenge against his former employers, the analyst provided Marcus with a key piece of information. The initial funding for Sterling Corporation had been funneled through the firm from an anonymous benefactor. The account name was a code Prometheus. Prometheus, Elise murmured, reading Marcus's encrypted email late one night in her study. The name resonated with a cold, mythic certainty. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. Who better to represent Alistair Finch, the man who had stolen Sterling Innovations technology and let Edward Sterling take the fall? The final pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Finch hadn't vanished. He had reinvented himself. He had used the profits from his betrayal to fund Vivian, his former boss's daughter. It was a brilliant, cruel piece of psychological manipulation. He had turned the victim of his crime into his proxy, using her grief and her thirst for revenge as a shield for his own activities. Vivian had spent her life hunting a ghost, never realizing the real monster was her patron saint. Armed with this new knowledge, Marcus was able to connect the Prometheus account to a new identity. Finch had created a reclusive British philanthropist named Lord Ashworth, who now lived in a fortified estate in the Scottish Highlands. But this knowledge wasn't enough. They needed proof that would stand up in court. They needed a human source. "I've found someone." Marcus's next email read, "A man named Robert Dean. He was the chief engineer at Sterling Corporation for 10 years. He was fired 2 years ago. The official reason was insubordination. The real reason, he started asking questions." Marcus had tracked Robert Dean to a modest suburban home in Ohio, where he lived in semi-retirement, a bitter man nursing a deep grievance. Elise knew she had to handle this herself. A phone call wasn't enough. She needed to look this man in the eye. She flew to Cleveland under a pseudonym, renting an anonymous sedan at the airport. She found Robert Dean tending his garden, a man in his late 60s with weary eyes and calloused hands. She approached him not as a judge, but as something else, a fellow seeker of justice. "Mr. Dean," she began, her voice calm and direct, "my name is Elise. I believe you were wrongfully terminated by Vivian Sterling. I also believe you know why." Dean's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who believes the truth matters," she said. "I know that Vivian Sterling rebuilt her company using the same fraudulent methods her father was accused of. I know that the innovative technology her entire corporation is based on is a lie, a dangerous one, and that you discovered it. And I know that Alistair Finch, the man behind it all, is the one pulling her strings." Dean's face went pale. He dropped his trowel. He had lived in fear for 2 years, bound by a draconian non-disclosure agreement and the threat of financial ruin if he spoke out. "She'll destroy me," he whispered. "She is trying to destroy me too," Elise replied, her voice softening with a shared vulnerability. "But together, we can stop her. I am not asking you to go to the press. I am asking you to help me deliver the truth in a way that she cannot escape. I am a federal judge. Mr. Dean, I give you my word I will protect you." For an hour. They sat on his porch as he unburdened himself. He told her how he had discovered that Sterling Corporation's flagship product, a revolutionary composite material used in everything from airplanes to medical devices, had a critical design flaw. It degraded under specific environmental conditions, a flaw that was being systematically concealed through falsified safety data, just as it had been 30 years ago. He had the original data, the real test results, stored on a password-protected hard drive, his insurance policy. She called it acceptable risk, Dean said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. She knew, and she didn't care. Elise left Ohio with a copy of the hard drive's contents in her briefcase. She now held the weapon that could bring down not just Vivian, but the shadowy figure of Alistair Finch as well. The trap was ready. All that remained was to choose the time and place for it to be sprung. And Vivian, in her hubris, was about to provide the perfect stage. The invitation arrived via a sleek, black courier envelope. It was an announcement for a global press conference. Sterling Corporation was announcing its largest ever merger, a $50 billion deal with a German manufacturing giant that would make Vivian Sterling one of the most powerful women in the world. The event would be live-streamed from the company's futuristic, glass-walled headquarters in downtown Metropolis. It was to be Vivian's coronation, her moment of ultimate triumph. For Elise, it was the perfect killing ground. She met with Marcus one last time. In the quiet of her chambers after hours, the city lights twinkled below, a sea of indifferent stars. "She's handing us the gun and loading it for us," Marcus said, a predatory gleam in his eyes as he reviewed Elise's plan. "The key is precision, Marcus," Elise instructed, her voice calm and strategic, like a general briefing her top field commander. "We cannot lead with an accusation. We must lead her into a trap of her own making. You will not be an accuser. You will be an inquisitive journalist asking logical questions. You will get her to lie, on the record, in front of the world. The evidence will do the rest." She handed him a slim folder. Inside was a list of carefully sequenced questions, each one a step deeper into the minefield. Also inside was a press pass for the event, secured through a contact at the Justice Department who owed Elise a significant favor. "She'll have a list of approved journalists," Marcus noted. "My name won't be on it." "The pass is under the name of a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who has suddenly come down with a 24-hour flu," Elise said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "He is a friend. He understands the importance of a good story." Marcus grinned. "I love it when a plan comes together." On the day of the press conference, Elise did not go to the Sterling Tower. Instead, she watched from a secure video link in her chambers, a silent observer in the digital shadows. David stood beside her, his expression a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation. The press conference was exactly the spectacle of corporate power Vivian had intended. A massive stage was set up in the soaring, multi-story atrium of the Sterling Tower. The company logo, a stylized silver S, hung suspended behind the podium. Hundreds of journalists from around the world jockeyed for position, their cameras flashing, creating a constellation of artificial light on a massive screen. A countdown clock ticked down the seconds to the live broadcast. Vivian made her entrance to a swell of orchestral music. She was a vision of power in a crimson suit, her smile radiant, her confidence absolute. She was at the zenith of her power, the master of her universe, completely unaware that her world was about to be reduced to ash. She delivered her opening remarks with flawless polish, speaking of innovation, synergy, and a future built on the foundation of Sterling Corporation's integrity. Elise watched the performance, feeling not hatred, but a profound and tragic sense of waste. All this brilliance, all this drive, twisted and corrupted by a grief that had never been allowed to heal. Then, the floor was open to questions. The first few were softballs from friendly outlets, about share prices and regulatory hurdles. Vivian answered them with effortless charm. Then, the moderator pointed to a man in the fourth row. "Marcus Thorne, Wall Street Journal," Marcus said, his voice clear and steady as he rose, his question preempting the one on the teleprompter. Vivian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The name was not on her approved list, but in front of a global audience, she could not refuse the question. A remarkable story of resurgence. "Ms. Sterling," Marcus began, his tone respectful. "Building this empire after the tragic collapse of your father's company, Sterling Innovations. Could you speak to how the lessons learned from your father's experience have informed your own commitment to corporate ethics?" It was a brilliant first move. It forced Vivian to publicly align herself with the highest ethical standards. "An excellent question," Vivian said, recovering smoothly. "My father's tragedy was the crucible in which my own principles were forged. At Sterling Corporation, we believe that transparency and safety are not just priorities. They are our entire reason for being. There is no compromise, ever, on the integrity of our products." She had walked straight into the trap. "It's heartening to hear," Marcus said, nodding. "Which is why I'm curious about your company's core technology, the SC300 composite. It's remarkably similar in its molecular structure to the alloy that led to Sterling Innovations' downfall. Can you assure the public that the flaws inherent in that original technology have been completely eradicated?" A murmur went through the room. Vivian's posture stiffened. The question was too specific, too knowledgeable. "That is an absurd and offensive comparison," she said, her voice turning sharp. "Our SC300 composite is a completely new technology, the safest and most rigorously tested material on the market. To suggest otherwise is libelous." She had committed to the lie. Marcus held up a tablet, its screen glowing. "Then perhaps you can explain these documents, which I am now publishing live. These are the original, internal test results for SC300 provided by your former chief engineer, Robert Dean. They show a catastrophic failure rate of over 40% when the material is exposed to low-frequency vibrations, the exact same flaw as the original alloy. A flaw you have been concealing for over a decade." Chaos erupted. Shouts, gasps, the frantic clicking of 100 cameras. Vivian's face, projected onto the giant screen behind her, was a mask of disbelief and horror. The color drained from it, leaving her crimson suit looking garish and loud. As the pandemonium unfolded, Elisa's encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus, but it wasn't from the press conference. It was a forward of a final text he had just received from Robert Dean. "Tell the judge one more thing." The text read, "Vivian's father. I worked for him, too. Back at the old company. A good man. He didn't know the data was fake. Finch handled all the testing. Edward Sterling took the fall to protect his daughter. Finch threatened to ruin Vivian, to make sure she never got into a good school, never had a future. If he didn't take the blame, he went to prison for her." The words hit Elise with the force of a physical blow. The secondary twist, the final, terrible turn of the knife. Her righteous act of whistleblowing 30 years ago hadn't just been based on incomplete information. It had been a catastrophic misjudgment. She had sent a man to prison who was not a monster, but a father making an impossible choice. She had been Alistair Finch's unwitting pawn, the perfect instrument to clear the board for his own escape. Her moral certainty, the bedrock of her entire career, cracked down the middle. On the screen, Vivian, cornered and exposed. Finally broke. Her carefully constructed persona shattered, revealing the raw, wounded 17-year-old underneath. "He knows nothing!" she shrieked into the microphone, her voice ragged with panic and fury. She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus. "You who sent you. Was it her? Was it Elise Montgomery?" Her eyes, wild and desperate, seemed to stare directly through the camera, through the miles of fiber optic cable, and into Elise's very soul. "She did this," Vivian screamed. Her confession broadcast live to the world. "She destroyed my family once. And now she's doing it again. She sent my father to prison, a man who was only trying to protect me. You think she's a saint. She's a monster who builds her legacy on the ruins of other people's lives. She destroyed us over a partial truth." The feed cut out. The screen went black. But Vivian's final, agonized words echoed in the profound silence of Elise's chambers, a judgment more piercing and absolute than any she had ever delivered from the bench. The merger had collapsed. Vivian's empire was in ruins. Elise had won. But in the hollow chamber of her heart, it felt, unmistakably, like a loss. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The live-streamed implosion of Vivian Sterling became the biggest corporate scandal in a decade. The stock of her company, and that of the German firm, plummeted into freefall before trading was halted. Federal investigators, armed with the evidence Marcus had published, descended on Sterling Tower, seizing servers and carting out boxes of documents. Vivian was arrested, her perp walk in the crimson suit a final, humiliating image broadcast across the globe. The news cycle was a maelstrom of headlines: Sterling's empire of lies, billionaire CEO arrested for massive fraud, the 30-year vendetta that brought down a titan. Marcus Thorne became an overnight celebrity. His article, a Pulitzer contender. Robert Dean was hailed as a hero. In her chambers, Elise watched the storm from its quiet eye. The ethics complaint against her was withdrawn with a formal apology from the Judicial Council. The Axiom Tech case proceeded without further incident. Her name was cleared. Her reputation not just restored, but enhanced. She was lauded as a figure of unshakable integrity who had withstood a malicious attack. But she felt no triumph. The victory was a bitter ash in her mouth. Vivian's final, shrieking accusation replayed in her mind. She destroyed us over a partial truth. The words haunted her. She had spent her entire professional life in the pursuit of absolute truth, believing in the clear, bright line between right and wrong. Now, that line was blurred into an unbearable gray. Her righteous decision as a university student, the act that had defined the moral trajectory of her life, was tainted. She had been an instrument of injustice, not a champion of it. She had sent an innocent man, or at least, a less guilty man, to prison, and in doing so, had destroyed a family and created the very monster she had just been forced to slay. The weight of this new understanding was crushing. The guilt she had carried for 30 years was not for a necessary betrayal, but for a terrible, consequential mistake. She met with Marcus a week later. The diner seemed dingier than before, the coffee more bitter. He was energized, fielding offers from major newspapers and publishers. "We did it, Elise," he said, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "We took down the whole damn rotten structure." "Did we, Marcus?" she asked, her voice weary. "Or did we just perpetuate a cycle of destruction that I started 30 years ago?" She told him what Robert Dean had revealed about Edward Sterling's sacrifice. Marcus listened, his celebratory mood slowly deflating. "I was able to confirm it," he said quietly, pulling out his notepad. "Talk to another old source from the DA's office. There were always whispers that the case against Edward was too neat, that Finch had leverage. They couldn't prove it. So they went with the evidence they had. The evidence you provided. He looked at her, his usual cynicism replaced by a flicker of sympathy. You couldn't have known. Elise, you were a kid, doing what you thought was right. That's the problem. Marcus, she said, staring into her cold coffee. I've built my entire life on the certainty that I know what is right. What happens when that certainty is gone? She spent the following weeks in a state of deep introspection. She went through the motions of her job, her judicial mask firmly in place. But inside, she was adrift. The world no longer seemed a place of clear moral choices, but a complex, tragic tapestry of flawed human beings making impossible decisions. Vivian was not a simple villain, but a product of profound trauma that Elise herself had helped to inflict. Her quest for justice had felt pure, but now she saw the thread of personal vengeance woven through it. Had she pursued Vivian with such relentless focus only to protect her court? Or had she been driven, on some subconscious level, to finally silence the ghost of her past, to punish the woman who had once held the power to destroy her? The legal system ground on Alistair Finch, A.K.A. Lord Ashworth, was arrested at his Scottish estate and extradited to the United States to face charges. Vivian, out on bail and facing a lifetime in prison, was a recluse, her assets frozen, her power gone. The world expected Elise to savor her victory. They saw a story of good triumphing over evil. But Elise knew the truth was far more complicated. Both she and Vivian were wounded survivors of a tragedy that had scarred them in different ways. Vivian had been consumed by a lust for revenge. Elise had been blinded by a self-righteous certainty. In the end, both had led to ruin. One evening, staring out the window of her study at the city lights, she knew she could not let the story end this way. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It had to be about restoration. It had to be about breaking the cycle. Her empowerment could not come from winning a war. It had to come from building a lasting peace. Months melted into a year. The Sterling Corporation scandal slowly faded from the headlines, replaced by new crises and new outrages. Vivian Sterling, in a plea deal that involved her full cooperation against Alistair Finch, was sentenced to 10 years in a minimum security federal prison. Finch received a life sentence. The bulk of their illicit fortunes were seized by the federal government. For most, this was the end of the story. For Elise, it was the beginning of her true work. She did not seek vengeance or revel in Vivian's downfall. Instead, she began a quiet, determined campaign behind the scenes. She used the considerable influence and respect she now commanded, not for personal gain, but for a purpose that had crystallized in the painful aftermath of her victory. She met with the Attorney General, with senators on the Judiciary Committee, and with the heads of the nation's largest charitable foundations. She spoke not of her personal ordeal, but of the systemic failures it had exposed, the ways in which corporate power could subvert justice, the vulnerability of whistleblowers, and the immense pressure on individuals to remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. The result of her efforts was the establishment of a new, independent foundation, created by an act of Congress and funded by the billions of dollars seized from Sterling Corporation and Alistair Finch. It was called the Sterling Montgomery Initiative for Corporate Accountability. Its mission was twofold: to provide robust legal and financial protection for whistleblowers, and to fund a new generation of prosecutors and investigative journalists dedicated to uncovering corporate malfeasance. It was an act of profound, symbolic justice. The wealth built on lies and deceit would now be used to arm the truth-tellers. The name, which many found surprising, was Elise's sole, non-negotiable condition. It was an acknowledgement of the complex, tragic bond that tied her to Vivian, a recognition that this new beginning was born from their shared history of ruin. The final scene of Elise Montgomery's Long War was not set in a courtroom or a grand ballroom. It took place in a modest, sunlit office on the second floor of a refurbished brownstone, the new headquarters of the Sterling Montgomery Initiative. The smell was not of old leather and law books, but of fresh paint and new beginnings. Elise sat not behind a judge's bench, but at a simple round table, a pot of tea between her and a young woman in her late 20s. The woman's name was Sarah Dean. She was Robert Dean's daughter, and the Foundation's very first legal fellow. She had her father's weary eyes, but they were alight with a fierce, idealistic fire. "I still can't believe this is real," Sarah said, gesturing around the office. "After what Ms. Sterling did to my father, to see her name on a place like this." Elise poured them both a cup of tea, her movements calm and measured. "The name is a reminder. Sarah," she said, her voice gentle. "It's a reminder that justice isn't always simple. It's a reminder that people are not just one thing, not just heroes or villains. And it's a reminder that the most powerful thing we can do with our pain is to use it to build something that prevents others from suffering in the same way." She looked at the young lawyer, seeing in her the reflection of her own younger self, passionate, certain, and convinced of the clarity of right and wrong. She knew the hard lessons that life would teach her, but she also knew that within that fire was the hope for a better world. "Your father was a very brave man," Elise continued. "He held on to the truth, even when it was dangerous. Now, it's our job to make sure people like him never have to stand alone." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude and purpose. "I won't let you down." "Your Honor." "I know you won't," Elise said, a genuine smile warming her features. "And please, in here, call me Elise." She looked out the window at the bustling city street below. The ghosts of the past were not gone. The guilt, the regret, the profound sorrow for the lives shattered by a single, youthful act of certainty, they would always be a part of her. But they no longer defined her. Her ultimate empowerment had not come from destroying her enemy, but from transforming their shared tragedy into a legacy of healing and hope. She had broken the cycle. She had used her power not just to win, but to build. And in that quiet, sunlit office, a new story of justice was just beginning.